All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for sticking to the end of the day. We've got the final session where we're going to be talking about one of the hottest areas of tokenized finance right now, which is vaults. And we've got some great people that are coming on stage to unpack it. I'll let them take it away. Herwig, don't do anything I wouldn't do.
Well, that's a whole lot of
leeway
there. Right on. Well, I'm excited for this panel. Some of you may have heard me yesterday being very, very excited by vaults. But specifically, we're not just talking about any vaults. In fact, most of vaults in DeFi today are not exactly tied to RWAs, right? But we are starting to see a change, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about here, specifically also with how institutions are interfacing with this opportunity within really what's stretching the boundary of with DeFi and RWAs. And I'm going to pick on Bryan here to start, because your title is, give us your title, because it was the chief, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of AlphaGrowth, but most of the time I spend on chief strategy on DeFi vaults and structured products.
So I'm going to pick on you to say, what's really the difference in tokenizing with a wrapper, right, a straight tokenization versus why people are now exploring a vault vehicle for a fund?
Okay. So I think the biggest difference is access to capital, right? So if you think about superpower of blockchain, it's a secondary market and rate discovery. So the traditional markets are really good at a lot of things, but regulation and access unlocks when you start to bring those different products and those different credit opportunities on chain. So you can start to understand, not just from a localized point of view, but from a global space, what potential like credit rates can come in, and global access. And also another thing you can do when you go into the DeFi space, it's another form of marketing. It's another user that wouldn't traditionally have access to particular asset classes.
Yeah, and I think that's a big point of access. But Luigi, I'm going to go to you next. We were just joking about this. You were earlier at Aave Labs. Now you're at Aave Labs. Aave is the biggest lender in the space right now for DeFi and vaults. But you guys actually have an institutional product live today called Horizon, right? So can you just give for the folks in the room a brief breakdown on what is Horizon?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. The Horizon market is effectively a $500 million market that features a few sort of institutional assets. There is money market funds, there is a receivables sort of index that was just launched called M Global. There's an Invesco fund, there's Janus Henderson's AAA CLOs. And so this is effectively a market where KYC is done at the asset issuer level. And there's also a Superstate fund, USCC in there as well, so didn't want to forget that. And what we're seeing funds that come in, see these different types of yield opportunities. They're able to leverage them in the Horizon market with more comfort. And that's really just one opinionated instance that we have. With the V4 architecture that Aave is sort of bringing to market, we can have many more of these sort of isolated lending pools that really sort of like curate for the right type of lending risk, whether that be counterparty risk or sort of like asset mix in general.
Oh, that's amazing. We're going to get back to some more of that. But briefly, Todd, with R3, before we were doing a little panel prep outside, you actually mentioned that not everything should be tokenized in the first place. We don't need everything to be natively digitally on chain. How do vaults help be an alternative to going down that route? And give some of your reasoning for everyone in the room why you told me that.
Yeah, well, I guess if you think about vaults, we're very excited about vaults as a new primitive, a new way to organize asset management. I guess, taking a step back, at R3, we've been in the space for about 10 years. And we've spent a lot of time working with large institutions, banks, exchanges, and others on market structure change. And that's happening, it will happen. But that time really gave me conviction that all markets are going to become on-chain markets. So the more that we can help bring better, more diversified real-world assets on-chain, the better off we'll all be. And then be able to iterate while we're on-chain using things like vaults to try and improve on-chain markets, because eventually I think there's going to be more and more activity that migrates on-chain as opposed to trying to fix markets off-chain. I think if you think about where we are today, there is a lot that can happen off-chain to be able to create better assets and organize them in a way to manifest them on-chain for investors. Because where we're focused on right now, I think in order to get these on-chain markets really to start growing is we need to be faster with how we bring these assets and these yield products on-chain to interact with on-chain markets. So that's why I think there is a lot of complexity you can continue to hide behind the curtain on the traditional side and really improve the inventory of assets on-chain. I think that's a huge thing that everyone in this room should be working on.
Yeah, there's easier ways to take advantage of the blockchain without having to go the distance in a way of sorts. Robert, with Superstate, you guys have actually tokenized 2 products, USTB, USCC. Can you tell us your kind of view on tokenizing the fund as a process versus now how vaults are starting to evolve kind of in the picture?
Yeah, vaults are a very interesting product, and just to describe them for anyone who's not already familiar, if this hasn't been touched on yet, a vault is a product where somebody essentially deposits stablecoins and earns a yield, and that yield can be based on this vault holding a specific investment product. It could hold a T-bill fund, it could hold a high yield fund, it could hold a portfolio of stuff, it could have its own levered strategy, it can do really anything. But the vault concept is, user puts stablecoins in and gets a return on stablecoins. And to differentiate that from, Luigi and Aave Horizon, in a lending protocol, someone might deposit a tokenized fund that they own instead of depositing dollars, and they might borrow from the protocol and essentially benefit from leverage by borrowing stables and doing anything they want with it, off-chain, on-chain, et cetera. And so vaults are a really straightforward user experience that, historically have mostly held very crypto-native strategies. Right now, the evolution is that these vaults are starting to hold off-chain assets, RWAs, whatever you want to call them, including tokenized funds and tokenized products that firms like Superstate are creating. So vaults now, when you just boil down the user experience, it's a way to gather capital from a broad audience in which they're deployed, sometimes on-chain and increasingly off-chain.
That's, first of all, a fantastic explanation. You mentioned around your 2 funds, I do want to poke on some of the news that you teamed up with Invesco and Bitwise recently for the management of those products. Can you tell us a little bit more about just the strategic decision and also what that means for the future of Superstate in terms of the direction you're going?
Yeah, absolutely. So, 2.5 years ago when we founded Superstate, the concept of tokenization was still relatively primitive, right? And, most mainstream asset managers, across the street didn't really see the benefits of tokenizing an investment product and bringing it onto the blockchain. And so when we first launched a tokenization platform with the idea of how do you take a security and turn it into a token so it can go inside a vault, so it can go inside a lending protocol like Aave, so that it can be transferred amongst whoever wants to transfer it. The fastest and easiest way to bootstrap this was Superstate creating our own investment manager and our own investment products to get this up quickly without really needing the permission of established incumbents. Now, the benefits of tokenization, I think, are being appreciated across Wall Street. Almost everyone gets it now. I can't walk into a bank or an asset manager without them saying, how do we tokenize? And so now what we've done is we've shifted the model to us partnering with, incumbent asset managers and bringing the technology, bringing the platform, bringing the compliance, bringing the operations to say, hey, you have a great product, we'll turn it into a token so that it can be more useful in a DeFi protocol. And there's a huge pipeline of products that are going to be launching throughout the rest of this year of other established investment managers. And I think it really points to how the market is going to continue to evolve.
I love that. And I'm going to go back to Todd over here. There was last year an announcement with Solana that you guys are now building on Solana. So I want to just touch up on that, especially also in the lens of vaults. I think private credit and other structured products are amongst what you're working on. So are vaults in this picture? And just tell us a little bit of update on how that's going with Solana.
Yeah, well, Robert unsurprisingly gave a very clear explanation of vaults, and quite simply, we're launching yield vaults on Solana. So Corda, the Corda protocol, will be RWA-backed yield vaults. Put stablecoins in, get yield out. We are focused on fixed income and alternatives generally. If you think about our ecosystem working with asset managers and banks, banks are origination machines. They originate to distribute, and we feel that what we're building on Solana is a excellent vehicle to help with that distribution, and that's what we're focused on. And if you think about the Solana ecosystem, Superstate and others that are building with that ecosystem, two things that we looked for when we were looking for a partner, a layer one and an ecosystem partner, and Solana ticked all those boxes. There's obviously from the technology to how they're really trying to architect a single market and try to concentrate liquidity is quite important. But I think probably most importantly was the cultural alignment. They're incredibly focused on the institutional space and how they can help improve on-chain capital formation. So that's what we're focused on, having our existing ecosystem, helping to bring them on-chain. But I think, as Robert mentioned before, this has to be product-led. It has to be something where we are capturing not only the hearts and minds, but literally the wallets of those on-chain. So that's why we're focused on, can we source unique and differentiated yield that people can understand, but is still attractive enough? And I think everyone in DeFi wants the highest yield with the most liquidity, right? I would love to be 6'3" as well.
And the least risk.
Yes, yes. So, but we're trying to square that circle as much as we can, and I think the one thing I would say is that there's a ton of creativity within DeFi, but there's also a ton of creativity effectively within Wall Street. There are lots of those that are working in TradFi that are incredibly excited to be able to package existing products, but also tweak them and use vaults for really architecting different types of products. So instead of the one-off structures, you can have evergreen structures. There's lots of things you can do, all where you can sort of move to having vaults flip the product for asset management. Instead of it being very, very product-led, here's my 5 choices you can pick. Eventually, we're going to get to a very, very client hyper-specific version where vaults are tailored specifically to the investor. So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of energy, a lot of creativity on the TradFi side to be able to not only experiment, but to deploy on-chain.
I'm looking forward to personalization myself. And Luigi, just to highlight for everybody, right, in DeFi right now, is rough numbers around 12 billion TVL, right? Most of it, again, going back to crypto-backed strategies, but there's, I think, about 300 million roughly locked up already on Aave Horizon. How do you see this market evolving? Do you think, especially, I think yields in DeFi tend to hovering lower and lower lately. Do the RWA competitive yields start to migrate some of the existing money on chain? Or is this a new market where institutions are going to be just using the technology, right? But not necessarily doing it in a very public or retail accessible way?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the Horizon market's just one opinionated sort of market that we have. It's about 500 million or so. The sort of like the idea for something like Aave was, a long time ago when people wanted to get loans out on their crypto assets. There weren't many institutions willing to provide that capital. Right, I think Robert knows this pretty well as well. And so Aave really served the need in the market. And when it did that, it also brought a bunch of innovation. In fact, being able to have these sort of atomic sort of strategies where you can borrow against and loop assets, and then all the things that eventually turned into vaults. Aave was like one of the primitives underneath that. As I see this like sort of market playing out, one of the areas we're increasingly focused on is securities lending or sec lending in the traditional sense. Right now, that's a market that is quite opaque in the traditional world. A retail individual doesn't really have a good sense on what yield they could earn or lend out their stock for. It's something that the broker really is sort of taking the entire ownership of that process, lending it out. That's something where Aave really fits in well. Right? And it's also how we should think about the go-to-market for tokenizing equities writ large, because Everybody keeps talking about we're going to tokenize. Well, if there's no reason for it, then people aren't going to do it. So what we need to do is we need to create a two-sided marketplace where there's a need for, one, the deposit of the asset, but two, also to borrow. And so if we have a function where retail or funds have a reason to deposit their equities on chain because, one, they'll earn a yield that they were never going to earn otherwise, then that makes sense. Once we do that, then we'll be able to drive the borrow rate down enough that it can be really interesting for funds that are exogenous to crypto to come in and see an opportunity where there's a sort of like an arbitrage and borrow the assets from there. And then as you do that, you sort of really rip out some of like the opaqueness of the prime brokerage model that can be really beneficial for, that something that Aave can serve, because you can't rehypothecate your assets, and you can't have some of the issues that have happened with investment banks historically. So that's not going to be an easy feat. I don't want to come up here and say like, hey, we're going to kill prime brokers tomorrow. But I do think that there's like a market here that this technology is really well suited to serve, and that this is actually a reason for tokenized equities.
I want to have you follow up on that just a little bit too. Do you see that this market is going to evolve largely sort of the genie's out of the bottle, this thing's about to explode, or are we still sort of in the proof of concept stage where we're still sort of, you're having a lot of conversations, convincing people why and showing them how it works, but not everybody's jumping in right away. How do you feel about where we are?
Yeah, so I really hate taking the position like on a go-to-market strategy where you're like begging or sort of asking somebody to take their existing stuff and put it on your product. Like you have to force the market to move. And the only way to do that, one, is like get the clients on board for the original brokers, and then they all move. Or two is like to actually create what I just said, is like, create an arbitrage opportunity where they have no choice to get involved. So we really have to start like disrupting these markets very aggressively, rather than like asking people to take our technology and build it themselves.
I love that answer. But Bryan, I'm going to follow up with you on what we were talking about a little earlier. I asked you, how does compliance scale with something like this, right? DeFi, permissionless, right? People are just depositing stable coins. You've got some off-chain RWA activity maybe. That probably might scare a lot of institutions. How do they scale with their own requirements? How do they touch into DeFi using vaults like this?
Yeah, so there's a couple examples in the market. We invested in a company called Saturn Credit, where they have a large position of Stretch. So some of the guys that kind of helped advise the creation of the Stretch product said they moved out and they launched their own protocol to bring the Stretch yield on chain. So currently, the way that they were able to do this was to have a large block and have it in a like an SPV inside a Singaporean fund, and then 2 steps removed, they are able to then issue this token, print this token, and then get it within the DeFi space. So all the KYC, KYB redemptions go through a very compliant process, but you can effectively use the different locales in some interesting structures right now to get Stretch onto the blockchain and get global access.
Do you think that's sort of a sign that there still need to be a lot of navigating for institutions to really get comfortable with this? Or, it's solutions like this that mean that, we're there. It's not a fallacy. You can start taking advantage of this for a variety of different structures and funds.
Yeah, we're in a crawl, walk, run phase, right? So like an institution can't just directly issue an asset on chain, Superstate, Corda, like these types of solutions exist in the world. Until there's clarity, we'll still see these types of solutions, but it's kind of amazing. These guys with this getting Stretch on chain, they went from 0 to 200 million in under a month. Getting in looped assets, getting in products like, not necessarily Aave, but other like isolated lending markets. They were able to grow and give global access to a product that wasn't necessarily available. So one of the really interesting parts here is that some people are lending stablecoins against Stretch while they're not taking direct credit exposure. My concern for the overall like DeFi market and getting in lending is that if you're lending dollars or USDC against an asset and taking that credit risk, generally there's a commission or a VIG in between the lending protocol and the yield-bearing token. So the question is like, if you're taking that credit risk, why wouldn't you go into the original asset? And I still really haven't kind of figured out why somebody would do that, but it gets done.
It gets done. And that's what matters. Actually, speaking of getting done, I want to talk a little bit more about managing a vault, right? As folks are starting to consider this. Robert, since you have some actual experience right now managing with some products, how do you manage the liquidity concept of a vault, right? Because especially a lot of funds are used to longer hold times, or even if you have the ability to redeem in and out freely, right? Like, how do you actually manage that? Are there certain vendors involved? Yeah, please.
Well, I'll just talk about vaults. I'm not going to talk about funds that we've created. And, you know, big asterisk, Superstate does not manage any vaults ourselves. We create, you know, products that, you know, eligible investors might be able to purchase for a vault. But vaults are really a very flexible structure, right? What are vaults? They're computer programs on a blockchain, right? And these computer programs can have really simple logic or really complex logic. It could be as simple as, you know, user deposits money and, you know, it holds one asset. It could be more complicated where it's using leverage. It could be something that an investment manager, so to speak, and that could be, you know, an actual investment advisor, which is rarely the case. It could just be like two guys in a closet somewhere, which is oftentimes the case. You know, someone goes out and makes decisions on a daily basis about how the assets are administered, right? They might do offline things. They might take the money and go buy some stock or buy some debt or do something, right? There's so many different things, but really the vault structure enables a tremendous amount of potential financial engineering, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a, you know, it enables a lot of creativity way. And there will be terrible experiments conducted in public. There already have been some absolutely horrific, you know, irresponsible activities that have been conducted. And really good and productive products can be created as well, and everything in between. And so how are they managed? Well, you know, some are completely programmatic, right? It's literally smart contract code that anyone can read how it works. It can't be modified, it can't be tampered with, and it can be very simple. Like, you deposit money, it does X, Y, and Z. Some of it is just, hey, we're trusting the administrator of the vault. It could literally just be a cryptographic address. You don't even know who it is, to use their best judgment. It could be something even more exotic, where it's like, hey, it plugs into some AI model that makes a decision on what to buy, you know, on a daily basis, and what to buy is the best Calshare polymarket bet. It doesn't matter. It's like anything you can imagine you can create in a vault, and it opens up this incredible aperture of creativity. And so right now we're seeing a lot of different approaches, some programmatic, some manual. We're seeing different regulatory structures tried. We're seeing like SEC registered investment advisors managing vaults. We're seeing, you know, anonymous cryptographic public keys managing vaults. We're seeing everything in the middle, right? It's just an era of massive experimentation and innovation. And that's a good thing. And I think what we're going to be left with is, you know, car wrecks to learn from. We've already seen a ton of them, right? And we're going to see things that work and are resilient and are stable and that become a standard. And so, you know, right now, just there's so much variation in what is happening in these vaults. Almost anything you can imagine is probably being tried on some blockchain in some way.
I think that's pretty exciting. And Todd, you also mentioned that you're also actively building the space, right? So anything you want to add on, or any mistakes that people should be looking out for?
Well, I just, you know, feeding on what Robert was saying, so the vaults are something that the banks and asset managers are very, very focused on. And when those types are focused on something, it's usually some combination of fear and greed, and I think it's both. On the greed side, or the opportunity side, this is a new way to distribute product, and also potentially an incredibly cost-efficient way to tailor products, and that's what these folks do. That guy's excited about it over there.
He's going to go put his money in a vault right now.
Exactly. So on the fear side, you know, you look at effectively, I guess you were saying curators without mentioning the name, but you know, there's, you know, the curator space is an interesting one right now, and it's a lot of it is down to how how best to manage, say, smart contract risk, or that, you know, how well the machine is running, and what if there's any sort of hidden trapdoors there, and maybe a little bit less so on the managing, you know, financial risk. I guess one story I'll tell is that I was in Geneva a few months back, going into the most conservative-looking private bank office you can ever imagine. You know, basically someone opening the door with like a top hat and tails and all that and welcome you in. And I was there to talk about vaults and about how this I probably, you know, 300-year-old institution was thinking about how they could be an on-chain asset manager or effectively an on-chain curator using vaults. So there's a lot of thought going into this, and I think you're going to start to see more traditional players move into this. And I think they'll also get burned because smart contract risk is not something to F with, right? So, but I think there's going to be a lot that's going to happen in there. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I want to kind of keep going down the row on the same line of thinking. Is there any kind of designs or premium structures or asset classes that seem to be people that are gravitating towards for different types of funds out there in your experience? You know, is there something that works better than others? You know, we're talking about a variety of different ways you can do this, but in your experience, what's really working well right now?
Well, on the vaults topic, you know, we've had vaults since maybe 2021. You know, starting with Yearn effectively, and they've sort of like slowly matured at a very DeFi native way. But all they really are is just like this like smart contract you can put assets in and manage the allocations of them and take fees from. So they're effectively funds. I know nobody wants me to say that from a regulatory perspective.
How dare you?
But like, you know, I mean, depending on how it's managed and everything like that, it's obviously, that's what it is. And so operationally, it definitely removes a lot of like, sort of like operational overhead to managing funds and things like that. So they're obviously going to be the future to how that's done, and I think that's interesting. And so you'll have these sort of like vaults sitting on top of lending protocols like Aave in general, and then delivering yield back or delivering performance back to whomever the sort of like owners or the clients are. And I think it's a natural extension. The reason everybody's so excited about it, especially asset managers, is because that's effectively their business. And so they see a new opportunity to kind of like deliver the same sort of things that they do in the same business that they currently are in a new way. And a lot of times the hidden message that's really coming through is that they sort of see crypto as a new distribution mechanism for them. And you know, there's like, let's call it $1 trillion market of crypto. A lot of that's Bitcoin, but you remove out a lot of these sort of native crypto assets, and so there is some amount of dollars in the system searching for yield, searching for performance, and a lot of institutions are interested in capturing that. That's the less interesting part for me because it's actually not a large market, but the more interesting part is sort of redefining the market structure, sort of like how Robert was explaining before, because that's where we can actually you know, create efficiencies, create additional productivity, and deliver new value to people as an industry. What's working? A lot of interesting yield products being brought on chain. I think that, you know, crypto has realized that like in a higher yield environment, you need to go out sort of like on the risk curve to sort of like find that yield, and it's experienced sort of like the challenges with that TradFi's experienced for many years. And I call it the genie, the you know, low risk, no liquidity, high yield assets. So, but there are really interesting assets that can come on chain that crypto is interested in looping. When I say looping, what that really means is just levering up the yield and packaging back that sort of like net yield back to the owner. So that's something that's interesting enough where we are seeing a good amount of traction on that.
I love that you brought up looping. I'll let you run with that a little bit more on, you know, is this something that's critical for folks, or you're seeing that as an absolute edge versus other products, right? And tell us a little bit more about, I guess, some of the architecture behind it or how it kind of works more.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually. Like here's a problem that a lot of markets that are sort of dealing with, right? Let's say you have 3 tranches of yields. You have your investment grade set, you have your high yield set, and then you have something that looks more like, you know, junk bonds. Those generally will sit in 3 different tiers of yields. Let's call them the 5%, 7%, and 10%. The issue becomes from a market structure standpoint when you have those kind of baskets of assets sitting together. Everybody who's trying to loop those assets is borrowing dollars against that collateral and trying to then lever up the initial yield, delivering back, let's say, like a net 2 to 3 point improvement on the original yield. What ends up happening from a market structure standpoint is the borrow rate of the stablecoin ends up going much higher once you introduce sort of these higher yielding assets, leaving these sort of investment grade and some of the high yield not really, let's call it, loopable. And so there is a market structure design that we're working with on the V4 mechanism that introduces something called risk premiums. Risk premiums allows an additional sort of base yield on a collateral asset to be introduced such that we're able to have multiple collateral assets that have different yield properties, but not have to segregate those assets and now fracture liquidity. So this is something that's like a new market structure design that can allow for pooled liquidity, but without sort of some of the fractured liquidity that you see in isolated markets.
And Bryan, I'm not going to leave you out on if you want to answer the same question on any just in your experience, design mistakes or anything else you want to point out, you want to add. Otherwise, I got a new question for you.
Yeah, I think I'd like to answer a slightly different question or kind of like put things in perspective. If blockchain and crypto is like a $10 trillion asset class, maybe like 1% is in DeFi and maybe 10% is in vaults. If you can say, Aave is sort of like a vault, but it's it's not actively managed in particular terms. But what I'm trying to get at is that if 1% is in DeFi and like 10% of that, the market opportunity is massive and it's very, very early in terms of what we're seeing. And the beautiful thing about what we've done in DeFi, what Robert's done and what Aave is doing is effectively going through the pain points of these type of interest rate risks, transparency, smart contract hacks, and we've seen it all. So we've seen all kinds of different risks, and the industry is hardening again and again, and it's still small and it's growing. In terms of like vault construction, I think you hit the nail on the head. The beauty is transparency. Like our thesis is that there's a lending deal that we're working on, a private lending deal, and the rates that we're getting are between 4 and 12%, and lender by lender by lender, right? Something like Aave, something like Compound. Like the global rate discovery starts to become public and transparent, so you know exactly what you're going to get, and you know the exact credit risks of the products that you're using as collateral. And that's some of the beauty of the space, and we have to keep true to that.
Well, now we're going to unbottle another big topic here, which is AI. All right, we've already heard a couple presentations on agentic trading, right? What do vaults mean for the concept of an AI portfolio manager, right? And even in the context versus AI having to deal with a wrapper versus, as we are talking about, the ease of using stable coins, right? We've all heard of now AI being able to use stable coins for payments and other things. What does this mean for vaults in your view?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a major distribution channel for retail, right? So if you I don't know about you guys, but I know myself, I'm delegating more and more responsibility over time to the AIs that I interact with. And so the client discovery process and the research process is about getting your vault or your structured product or asset class discovered within the AI. And it's not too crazy to say with 2 clicks of a button, I have some maybe not a meaningful amount of my portfolio, but a small portfolio saying, hey, go yield chasing, and use modern portfolio theory to construct a portfolio for me. With a click of a button, you can deploy into these vaults. If you don't have that infrastructure in place, if you don't have the vaults in place, you're going to miss out on that opportunity for those people instantly clicking and entering into the market.
And running on the same topic of AI for you, Luigi, how do you feel about the future with AI for vaults? Is for example, if they can go in and out permissionlessly between products, and they're out there constructing portfolios in real time for people. What are the risks that are introduced? Are there concerns that we should be worried about if AI is programmatically making decisions like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of risks. There's a lot of risks to fund management with humans, but in an automated I mean, we need to remember that a lot of this stuff is kind of automated already. Right? It's not sort of like, like you're not really deferring to your retail AI agent, but within TradFi, these are all machine learning systems that are automating and rebalancing flows. And then, so that's not really, I think, anything new. With the on-chain world, there's a lot that has to go into it because you need to sort of do a risk analysis of every pool that assets are sitting in. So the construct of every pool creates sort of risk to the lenders of that pool. And so like if there's an asset in there that has some sort of existential risk, whether it be additional defaults on a fixed income product or smart contract risk on a wrapper or a bridge, that whole entire pool has some amount of risk. So these AI systems need to be able to sort of do a really good job of, one, understanding the sort of like risk to the pool, two, understanding the interest rate curves of each individual market, and three, understand the utilization, importantly, because a lot of times what the rate you'll see in the market is not the rate that you're going to get, especially if you're trying to move size. So I think it's really important that these are systems that really grow over time, especially in the on-chain world, because a lot of this stuff is sort of ever-changing, quite dynamic, and very, very risky. Especially, the OPSEC alone is something that scares me to death as it relates to AI and on-chain capital. But I'm sure we'll get to a place where that's like manageable. But I think that's definitely an area of risk.
As Robert mentioned, it's not necessarily going to be a very pretty road all the way through as we go through this, very novel experiment that's going to turn into the future standard, right, I think. Todd, going back to that same concept of anything to add for AI or otherwise, and go ahead if you have some.
I mean, I think step one is we need to have more assets on chain for AI strategies to be more useful. I think we have a little bit further to go on that front before you're going to start to see that take hold. And I think as Luigi mentioned, it's both the tail risk and the atomic nature of blockchains means that I think there will be some growing pains as we look to implement that. So because I think, in my background, previous life being in markets, I think it's very difficult to truly understand and price liquidity, because it's always changing, because market regimes are changing. So I think that's going to be probably the biggest challenge.
I want to stick with you for one more final question for you, which is, just in your experience, right, is there anything lacking, or is there a weakness in the market for vault infrastructure related to RWAs? Is there something you would like to see improved?
So I do think that there needs to be an increasing focus on overall security, so not just on the smart contract side, but operationally in the back end, because I think at the end of the day, there's still a very strong interaction with the quote-unquote real world. So how are stables brought off chain? How is all that operated? How can investors understand what actually is happening downstream from the vault itself? I think there's a ton to be done there, and obviously we're working on a lot of that, so we're excited to help improve it. I think over time, I think the main thing for vaults, in order for vaults to be truly effective, they need more investment choices on chain. So I think that's the biggest thing to work on.
I love that answer. And Robert, we're getting to the final part where you got to leave us with an amazing soundbite, but on that note, really, how important are vaults to the landscape of RWA tokenization, of attracting institutions coming on chain? Is this just another facet for another certain segment of finance, or is this truly much, much bigger?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'll go back to one of the things that Luigi said, where he called them funds. And it's funny because, they're not really funds, but they kind of are. When you look at them in the abstract, they look like funds, right? And that's like a form factor that everyone in traditional finance is used to, and that investors are used to, and it makes sense. Like, we use different words. We call them vaults, and instead of investment managers, you have curators, right? And like all these other things. But like, in a lot of ways, they look like funds. And that simplicity is one of the things that I think is so attractive, because everyone understands it intuitively. They're like, okay, you put your money in, it goes up, and like it sources its return from assets or strategies or whatever. And so I think it's very important to the scaling of RWAs and assets coming off chain, because it's a very simple form factor to connect capital and assets in a much simpler way than like people, with tokenized funds, like purchasing them directly. And so I think it's a very big tailwind for the growth of off-chain assets coming on-chain. It's one of the easiest paths for them. And I think for institutions and for retail alike, it's a very intuitive, structure to participate.
I love that. That's how we're going to close it out. I love learning from all of you on stage today. Everybody give them a round of applause. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.